Okay, let's start. So, a quick introduction for those of you who don't know me yet. So, I'm the co-founder and CTO of Jaya. And if you don't mind, I forgot to do something else. I'll do that quickly. So, and I hope the boat is not going to rock too much. So, let's just do that. For those of you who are wondering, you're not drunk. We are on a boat. So, okay. Yeah, so co-founder and CTO of Jaya. I'm an Apache committer on mostly two projects, Apache Jackrabbit and, of course, Apache Unomi. I'll talk about the Unomi in more details in my session tomorrow. I'm also the co-chair of the Context Server Technical Committee at Oasis. You'll learn about that also tomorrow in the same session. I have about 20 years of web development experience. I'm basically a coder at heart. I've been coding in many ways since I was 7. And I'm also very passionate and very interested in user experiences. So before we go too far, I want to sort of give a definition of what is headless, because you'll have like millions of definitions in the world. But basically, Jaya DX is a full-blown CMS that includes content definitions, content editing, content APIs, and HTML page delivery, including caching. So for us, a headless CMS is basically the CMS without the HTML page delivery. Just a question quickly. Can you read this line at the back? Yeah? No? Okay, so don't worry. I'll tell you what's down there for the ones who can. So when do you need a headless system? Well, basically when you don't want to use the default rendering system. When you want to integrate the content with another system, like such as another CMS, for example, because you're in transition phase, or with a delivery server of any kind. Or when you're building a mobile or a native or a desktop app. Because we forget about desktop apps, but there are more and more desktop apps being built with hybrid frameworks, for example. So what can you do with it? You can build single-page applications, which we see a lot of now. You could build custom websites with dynamic components, and actually Commerce.io is a very good example of that. You can build mobile applications, so whether they're hybrid or native, it could be totally native, that's also possible. And of course, desktop, which now has its equivalents. So in order to sort of give people an example of how to build a headless application with our system, we've built the Gateway app. So it's a little example of how to build a portal, an application that gives you browsing into destinations and so forth. And basically, of course, it's open source. It's built using React.js, NPM, and Node.js, and a library called the Apollo GraphQL client. Don't worry if you're not familiar with all of these, I'll go through them. It's basically a showcase of how to build these apps on top of DX. And it uses our brand new GraphQL API. So just a show of hands, who's familiar with GraphQL here? All right, okay. Now, the thing with the Gateway app, it does not require DX to run at all. You can run it on any web server. You could run it on a Node.js server or even on a static website. Under the hood, so basically it's a collection of React components, you can see here on the left, that are talking to a library called the Apollo GraphQL client. So it's basically a client library that provides everything you need to connect to GraphQL servers. And it's basically an app that talks to three different systems. So on the bottom here, you have the Google Places API that we use to sort of figure out where a place is based on some information that we have. And the Wikipedia API we use to look up information about places. So that's not very important. It's just a way to show you that you can integrate multiple APIs into a single app. Then we have the part that connects to the Jaya DX server, with the security filter being the first part. Very important, because we're talking about APIs that are potentially public. So going all the way to the browser. Then the implementation of the GraphQL API that talks to the JCR content. But we also have a module for our app, a module running in DX. And so basically this module comes with content definitions, some permissions for the GraphQL API, so to say which types are we actually exposing to the world, which ones are we not exposing, and some exceptions to the GraphQL API to do searches and things like that. Now, this is a sneak preview, okay? I don't want to get in trouble with any of the rest of the management team. So what I'm going to show here is the content manager. That's basically one of the brand new features of 7.3, and it's basically targeted at headless usage. So the idea is it's a new part of our UI, and that's really designed for that. So it's basically a headless backend UI. It allows you to create and manage content for your applications. It's built using React and the new GraphQL API. It also integrates with Marketing Factory and site settings, so you have everything in one place. And very importantly, what you'll see today is not finalized. There are still some quirks in the look and feel of the CSS. So if you see things that look a little bit strange, it's normal. They'll be all fixed by the time of the release, so don't worry. All right, so let's see if I can bring this up quickly. So I've got my DX here. Oops, I think I forgot to start it. Let me just check this. Yep. All right. So I'll just start that. Well, while starting, I'll just show you the next slide. So basically, again, here you'll see something similar to what we saw in the previous example. So the Content and Media Manager, as it's called, is again a collection of React components here on the left, talking again to the GraphQL client. It also uses something called Redux to manage state. So that's just a manage state inside the browser. And more surprisingly, it also uses GWT components. So what we've done here is that in order to integrate some of the APIs, some of the UIs, sorry, that we already have, we're able to call them directly. And for example, this is used for our most advanced UIs like editing content, where we have a lot of different options. And we didn't want to break that right now. And of course, on the GX server side, it's pretty much the same thing, except that we also talk, the GWT components talk directly to the backend. So let's see now if my server started. All right, let's try this again. Now let's try to make it a little bit bigger. So there we go. All right, so I'm going to quickly log in. And switch to edit mode. And here you'll see a preview also of our new menu to switch between modes. So here I'll go to the Content and Media Manager. So until now, I was in the old UI, the traditional UI of the CMS. This is completely brand new. This is a React app. And so here what I can do is I can browse content. I can go into the content if there are pages, for example, on my site. But I could also say that I want to create some new content. And I could say here, I want to create I have a new Jaya Days app, for example. And I want to create some content for that. So I'll just create it here. And then I can say I want to create, let's say, a news entry here. So all of this, as you can see, here actually what I'm showing you, this part is GWT, this part is React. So it's all integrated seamlessly. You have no idea that, that you're looking at two different things. And so, welcome to Jaya Days. There we go. Okay, and now I have this. I also have here the possibilities to publish and so forth. So I have a lot of different things I can do. The idea here is that it should be your one-stop shop for building headless applications. You won't even need anything else. All right, let's go back to the slides. Well, one of the most important things that I can't show easily in this session is that the part of the new UIs we're building now are designed to be pluggable and deliver reusable components. So the left menu that you see here is entirely pluggable. You can build your own modules that will integrate with it, and you could add anything you want any place. Actually, not only the left menu, but even if you saw the menu that I opened up on the folder, even you can plug into that also. So all of that you can do either using Java or JavaScript. That's actually how we integrated Marketing Factory and the site settings into the Content Manager. So let's talk about React for a minute, because React was a choice we made to build these apps. It is not by any means a requirement, but I just want to explain why we chose it. Basically, it's the most used front-end development framework in the world, by far now. It's entirely based on the notion of reusable components. It's pretty easy to integrate with a lot of different state management libraries, such as Redux or the Apollo GraphQL client, which you can see like that. I think we lost the sound engineer. Oh, no, there's feedback a little bit. Thank you. And it's highly compatible and fast. By highly compatible, I mean with browsers. So other solutions like Polymer, which are great, but they're a little bit more risky. React is really well established. And you can compose components to build much more complex ones. Now, on top of React, you can use libraries, and this is also a choice that we've made, called React Material. So basically, it's an implementation of Google's Material Design in React. And it offers all the nice look and feel and all these nice components that scale well. And this is an example that I took from the React Material page, where basically you have all these components to build dashboards and things like that. I think the only exception is the actual graph here. So it's easy to integrate. The components are responsive. It includes layouts and form components, and it supports theming. So basically, we just did a dark theme for that. Now, one important part that Cedric mentioned earlier is GraphQL. So about half of you don't know what it is. So to be honest, I'm very biased towards GraphQL. So here, if you hear me bashing on REST, that's who I am. I'm sorry. But basically, you can easily build things like this, like a query like this, where you can say, I want a hero object that has a name field, and inside of it, it has what we call a field that's actually a relationship to another object, like friends. So I want to retrieve the friends, and on the friends, I want to retrieve the name. So we basically expose object types and fields that can be relationships between objects. You can also, basically it works using a schema, but don't make that scare you away, because it's not like a schema in a database that's impossible to change. You can change it dynamically at any time. And actually in DX, we constantly change it. Whenever a new module comes up and adds something to the API, we're refreshing the schema all the time. And of course, what's really interesting, and this is why GraphQL was invented in the first place, is that it will only send you the data that you need. It will not send you fields and properties that you don't need. So you get very optimized traffic with GraphQL. So it's a way basically to retrieve objects and their related objects through relationships. So as I showed you, a person and its friends. So the schema is also very useful because you can use the schema to discover what's in the API, which is one of the nicest features of GraphQL. You can also expose very complex schemas, thousands of lines long if you want, through a single URL endpoint. So that's also making it much easier to have one endpoint and where you have everything available. As I said, it's very optimized. And what's also interesting, and this is also something that Facebook did when they invented GraphQL, is that you can use GraphQL to expose other APIs. So if you have a collection of REST APIs in your systems, and you want to put everything through GraphQL as a gateway, and say control which calls people can make, that's pretty easy to do with GraphQL. So this is actually what this illustration is about. There's API servers in a GraphQL server, and a GraphQL server here acting as a gateway, and then filtering and passing all the calls to the other servers. So I talked about what it is, but it's also very important to remember, because the name might be misleading, is it is not a table data query language like SQL is. So everybody, when I introduce people to GraphQL, the first thing it says, oh, is it like SQL, or how is it similar to SQL? Well, the best thing to remember is that it's not, and then maybe we can work on similarities, but mostly it's not. So down here, you probably can't read this, but it's an SQL example where it says select star from table name where column name equals value. This is not basically what GraphQL is. It's also not a URL scheme, where basically, or an architectural style. REST is all about giving you recommendations on how to build your URL and map it to an object. And then on that URL, you're actually executing methods based on get, put, post, and stuff like that. GraphQL has nothing to do with that. It doesn't even care about URLs. In the specification, URLs are not even there. And finally, unlike other APIs, GraphQL has its own input language, but it has only JSON as output. So there's no mixture of XML or other things. So it's only one payload type. So if we look at comparison between REST and GraphQL, so here, this is an example where you're trying to retrieve a list of albums, and along with these albums, the comments on each album. And so basically with REST, we're going to have a REST call that's going to access, well, here I think we're retrieving the images of an album, and then we're going to have a second call to access the comments of each album. In GraphQL, you can do that with a single call, where you just say, I want the assets with the ID and URL, the comments with the text. And basically with a single round trip to the server, you've got all the data that you want. Not only that, but you've only gotten the data that you want. If I'm not interested in whatever else kind of properties are in my, my object, I won't get them. Now, what's also important is, as we have a schema, we can validate the queries before they're executed. So whenever a GraphQL query comes in, as you have the schema, you can say, does it match the schema? If it doesn't, you just reject it. And so that means that out of the box, you have that security. If people are trying to mess with your API, that will make it harder. And trust me, people will mess with your APIs now, especially if they're public. The types can also evolve over time. So it's perfectly acceptable for an object to have like 3 types at first, and then you add a 4th one maybe 6 months later. Or you deploy a new module that adds a new field to your type. That's perfectly acceptable. And that's basically the main differences. The API, the Apollo GraphQL client. So when GraphQL was started, a few of the engineers from Facebook left the company and started a company called Apollo. And they started building all these tools around GraphQL. And the GraphQL library is an incredible one. Basically, it provides browser-side caching and batching, among other things. But what it means is out of the box, you can, if you're trying to request an object multiple times, it will cache it and deliver it only once. And if you're doing a lot of calls to the API, it can batch them for you. So out of the box, you get those. And what you can't read down here, and what I want to mention, is that they provide implementations for React, Vue, Angular, Android, iOS, and even Meteor. So that means that even if you're building a native app on iOS, you can use this library and directly access all of our APIs that are available in GraphQL. So here, this is something we couldn't provide before with REST because we would have had to implement all these libraries for you. In terms of authorization, so by default, all GraphQL calls are filtered. So even if you made your content available to guest readers, you will not be able to call them through the GraphQL API unless you set up authorization permissions. So these are just simple files. I know this is not readable, but these are just simple properties files where you specify for which API you want to grant access, what are the node types you want to give access to, and the paths that you want to authorize. And again, the path is the same one as I've shown multiple times. We always go through the security filter before accessing the API. GraphQL, so Cedric showed you quickly this tool, but I will get back to it very quickly. So it has two main use cases. You can use it to access the schema and browse documentation, and you can use it to test queries and mutations. And it features auto-completion, prettifying your code, and also it also saves automatically all your work in the browser local storage. So if you close your browser and come back, you won't lose your work. So let's look at that very quickly. So let's go. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to access the tools. So these are a collection of tools that are more targeted to developers and integrators. And down here, I have a new one. That's the GraphQL tool. So I'll just go into that. And here, basically, you can see that I already have a query. So that's the last query that I used. I'm just going to delete that for the moment. And here you see up on the right side is that I have this docs section here. And basically, this is automatically generated from the GraphQL schema. So as a coder, I had nothing to do. And I can start browsing this and looking at what's available. Here, I see I have a JCR field that returns a query. I can then look into the query, and here I see all the different fields that are available. I can say, let's choose this one, node by path. It get the GraphQL representation of a node by its path. And then I can see here I need to specify a path. So let's just try to do that. So here I'm going to start typing. And as you see, as I start typing, I get auto-completion immediately. And I say, OK, JCR, that looks good. I'll continue. Here, I want to use node by path. OK, let's give it a path now. I'm going to say I want to get the root object, the root node. Okay, now let's go back down here. And now basically I'm on a JCR node type object, and it gives me all the fields that are available. So I'm going to say, let's display the name. And let's see if we can display the UID. And let's display some children. So, well, no, let me do that afterwards. So here what I'm going to do, I'm just going to run. OK, what did I do wrong? Oh, yes, thank you. OK, here we go. Some people are following. And here you see this prettify button. I just click that and makes them much nicer right over the way. Now, let's say now I want to see some more. I want to see the children of the root node. So I'm just going to do children here. And open up the available properties. Here I'm just going to say nodes. And here I'm going to, oops, sorry. There we go. And I'm going to say I want to display, let's say, the path. OK, so I'm just displaying the path. So right here, just with this code, you see I retrieve all the children of my root node with the path of all of them. And if I prettify this again, I could say here that I want to add Let me see what else I could take. A display name, maybe. And as you see here, I'm just playing with the API. I'm just having fun and seeing what's possible. And I can learn it as I go. And even for arguments here, I also have auto-completion. All right, so let's go back to the slides. You can build more complex queries. You can use variables. For example, to avoid having hard-coded things here, you can use variables and then pass them here. This is useful when you're reusing the same queries over and over. You can also do mutations. So mutations are GraphQL's way of modifying objects in an API. So here, basically, I provide a mutation that lets you modify a property on the root user. So here you can see I'm changing the organization to JS Solutions. Last but not least, you can extend the GraphQL API using modules. So whatever you've seen here, you can add your own. And you can not only add your own, but you can add your own on existing types. For example, this node type that I used, you could say, oh, I want to add a field to that that's specific to my application. And you can use that. And the way you do that is you provide a DX GraphQL provider that's basically an OSGI service that gives you, that returns extensions, and then you just implement your extensions using these annotations. And you will basically, here we're extending the JQL JCR node, so the node object I was using, and adding, this is actually inside a Marketing Factory. We're adding the Marketing Factory field to access Marketing Factory data. All right, I think that pretty much covered it for the slides part. Do you have any questions? Did I go too fast?
You went a little bit too fast. So who's exciting to test that GraphQL things in the next projects?
I might just add one thing. All of this is slated to come out with the next release of DX. That's, of course, scheduled for the end of the month. So you'll get your hands into this very quickly. Yeah, there's a question.
Sir, can you talk about the authorization and authentication elements more with the GraphQL for the protected content? And is there support for JWT, or what's the recommended?
Okay. That's a very good question. So what I showed you right there, in this code base that I have on my machine, there's no support for JWT yet. So that's a JSON, token, sorry. But it's actually already committed. So we're actually, I think it was added last week. And so what that means is that you have actually, no, I'm sorry. No, I have it. It was in my tools, absolutely, you're right. I did update for that part. So yeah, if I go back to the tools here. Oops, sorry. Yeah, it's right, you're right. I forgot I updated. So here, basically, I can configure my JSON web tokens, and I can add a new one. And let's say I have an app that's called Jaya Days. I can save this. And basically what it's doing is that it's using a secret key that's prepackaged with my DX server, actually with the GraphQL API. And it generates this token. And so then I can use this token inside my single page application and be recognized as having this token, and then I can use this to do the filtering in the GraphQL API. Or actually, as we use a DX security filter in any API, this also works for the REST API. So you can, just using these tokens, you can actually do that. And in the demo I'll be doing afterwards, I'm not using that because I'm short of time, but yeah, it's entirely possible.
Excuse me.
Yes? For the APIs, yes. Mm-hmm.
Just for the APIs?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Isn't Valve that is working on the other contents
It's going through the... I'd have to get back to you on that because I know it's a filter that's in front of everything. So it will control, but it's not an authentication valve, if you want. It's a filter that filters the whole application. So it will tell you if you have access to it. But you can't use it for authentication. I don't think so. So correct me on that. No. Well, we can talk, because as we already have parts of the framework there, it might be easier to do it now. Okay, well, thank you very much. And so just to plug the next talk, the next section, I'll actually be live coding from scratch with, well, I have some notes, but a React app, connecting it to the DX GraphQL API, and I hope to see all of you there. Thank you. We'll have a 10-minute break now.
Yeah, there's a break. You can come back at 3:15. 15-minute breaks because you were too fast.
Oh, I thought I was too slow.